when I went around and handed out to the tables, it was actually two policies. One we did not look at all. It's purely a bonus handout, and that's the one on the email acceptable use policy. So I'm going to have no discussion of that, but that's one that you can just take for what it's worth. The second one that we spent the whole time talking about was the email archiving and retention policy. And the key takeaway here is that you just heard Jim describe the thought process behind document retention, or record retention, I guess I should say. The whole purpose of email retention is because certain categories of email classify as records and therefore have to be retained like any other record. There are other categories of emails that don't meet record quality status, and therefore there's no retention requirement on those. The only reason why you need to keep any email is governed by whether the content of that email makes it a record in the context of the client engagement that you're working on, or the internal, HR or payroll or whatever other category its content is. But the key is, if it's a record, you keep it. If it's not a record, you don't have to keep it. Fairly straightforward. So what we looked at, excuse me, as a group, we said there's a couple of ways you can get there. Start with, email coming into your mail system. There are really two ways that you can meet record retention compliance with email. One is a category that we labeled keep everything. And that means you have some sort of a hardware or software appliance or a system that sits in tandem with your mail server, and everything that comes or goes from it gets snagged, put off, archived, indexed, and retained. And therefore it's searchable, it's indexed, it's retrievable, it meets all of the criteria. Most people instinctively think, I'm not sure I want to do that. The more we went through the process, I think the more people started coming away thinking maybe that's not an all bad idea. Maybe we ought to give that a second look. But that is one criteria where you say keep everything and use an automated system that has no human intervention to do it. Now, having acknowledged that that's there, the policy that we've given you really covers the other alternative, which is to keep some, not all, some emails. Now, the way that any system of keeping some but not all has to work is centered around human intervention. Somebody's got to look at it and make a determination. Is this a record? Yes, we should keep it. Is this a record? No, I'll get rid of it. So you've got people making judgments at various steps in the process. Their judgment revolves around the question of, is this thing a record? And as we've said a couple times, if it is, you keep it. If it's not, you don't. If it's not a record quality, you delete it. End of story. You don't have to, there's no requirement to archive it, search it, retrieve it, anything. Just get rid of it. If I send an email to Mike that says, hey, you want to meet for lunch today? No requirement anywhere to keep that email. It's not a record. But if it is a record, then there's a couple of places that you could store it. One is you could just simply leave it in your email system. And all of the network administrator, mail administrators in the group feel their toes curl up when you talk about keeping it all in the mail system, because there's all kinds of things wrong with doing that. Talk to your mail administrator and find out what those are. The second, probably preferred category is to move those record quality emails out of the mail system and into your document management system, whether that's Go File Room, Document, Docket, Engagement, whatever it is that you're using, put it in there so it can be kept with the rest of the records for that client and that engagement. And then the third category is maybe there's some other, shared network drive or something that you're using, but some other place to keep it. So this policy that we went through and you now have copies of really follows this path. The keep some, decide if it's a record, yes, put it in the DMS, That's what this policy really governs. And most of our discussion was how to take this thing, go back, and when you read it, you'll see there are several places where you need to sit down and have a conversation with your firm's attorney, legal counsel, in-house or outside, whatever your system is. But sit down with the firm's lawyer and go through what do you need to keep and what retention periods are required. 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. And then once you've got that, there's a matrix in here on the second page that you can kind of fill out to, articulate the different types and record retention periods and so forth. And this policy gives you a framework for doing that. I think our group felt like that by the time we got done, we would be somewhere, in the upper half of the scale of, from nothing to having a complete policy. We were closer to having something than to having nothing. And with a little bit of work, you could go back and flesh this out and turn it into a real policy that your firm could live with.